we have an opportunity to step up economic activity, economic sanctions and steps in that area. We know that's going to make an impact. The head of the biggest Russian bank said so himself only a couple of weeks ago.
Tensions are escalating once again between NATO and Russia. Estonia is demanding urgent talks with allies, including the UK, after what it described as brazen violations of its airspace. 3 MiG fighters, which are capable of carrying hypersonic missiles, spent 12 minutes flying around Van Glu Island in the Baltic Sea before being escorted away by Italian jets. Poland and Romania have also reported incursions in the past 10 days. Estonia has asked NATO to open consultations under Article 4 of the Alliance's treaty. And we're very lucky to be able to speak now to Sir Adrian Bradshaw, who's a former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Good morning to you, Sir Adrian.
Good morning, Gizzo.
How serious is this in your, cold military assessment?
Well, it is serious. It's the second Article 4 violation of NATO territory in as many weeks, and it does demand a response. The problem is that Mr. Putin is pressing it, particularly, I think, at the European members of NATO, to explore just how cohesive we are. And it's pretty important that we show cohesion and strength, but also that we impose a cost for this aggressive action, because if we don't, it just encourages Putin to up the ante and take things a step further and a step further, heightening the risk of some inadvertent outbreak of conflict, which would be disastrous.
So it's time, you think, to draw some sort of line. How do you do that?
Well, NATO, the prime role of NATO, I think, as everybody understands, is to keep the peace for 1 billion citizens of NATO countries, including the United States. And in the context of this hostility from Mr. Putin, actually NATO's role is to avoid the Russian people becoming involved in a war with NATO. So we've got to get that right. And the way we do it primarily is through a clear understanding of everybody of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which is that aggression against one will be treated as aggression against all. We need to keep on reinforcing the point that aggression upon any one of us, if it comes to armed action, demands a response from all of us. That's the clear understanding which keeps the peace. In this context, we need to remember that we must employ hybrid deterrence. It's not just military deterrence. It's deterrence across the whole spectrum of potential responses in the political, diplomatic, and economic areas as well. And of course, we need very strong military deterrence, but we need options in those areas as well. And I think in this particular instance, clearly what we don't want to do is escalate militarily, because it increases the danger for everybody. It may be necessary, by the way, to shoot down Russian jets if blatant incursions do occur. And that's not unprecedented. In 2015, a NATO member, Turkey, shot down a Russian jet which incurred into their airspace from Syria. So it's been done before. But I think in this context, bearing in mind the big issue with Ukraine, and we do not want Putin to achieve all he wishes to achieve in Ukraine, it might be appropriate for our response to be orientated towards support for Ukraine. And there is a strong case right now, reinforced by things Mr. Trump has said, for A, tightening sanctions, and B, in particular, with reference to Mr. Trump's desires, ceasing oil purchases from Russia. I mean, it is bizarre that the countries that are trying to prevent Russian success in Ukraine, on the one hand, some of them, on the other hand, are buying Russian oil, which is feeding the Russian war machine. So it's likely that our responses in terms of imposing a cost on Russia will be in the economic domain, and we need to get our act together and signal that intent quickly and then get on with it.
I know there's a lot of frustration that the sanctions that were agreed, and I was in number 10 when a lot of these were being put in place, have not been as effective, have not damaged, have not restrained Russia more than they have. They haven't sort of punished Russia. But you're also implying that we should be prepared, as Turkey did, to shoot down Russian airplanes.
Yeah, and I stress that there are various levels going up to that point. I mean, it's possible for us to signal to the Russian aircraft that they should leave, which is what happened, I believe, during this incursion, and they did so. And remember, it's not unprecedented for them to make incursions into Estonian airspace. They've done it before. We can also up the ante and lock onto them with weapons, radars, and that sort of thing to make it clear that they're in danger of being engaged. And I think it'll be up to the Article 4 deliberations at the political level and advice from the SACEUR himself, the Supreme Allied Commander, and his command team regarding the precise responses. But ultimately, it may well be that it's deemed appropriate to carry out a shoot down in order to deter. But as I say, this is not the only way we can go. And right now, there is a strong rationale for imposing a cost in other ways, because it would contribute to our other aims. I mean, in the context of Ukraine, it's very important that Mr. Putin doesn't get out of this situation having achieved what he wants to achieve, which is the subjugation of Ukrainian sovereignty and the inclusion of Ukraine into the new Russian near abroad. His gains need to be severely limited. He needs to know that he overreached on his all-out invasion of Ukraine. And we clearly need to do a lot more to achieve that, because right now the stalemate situation actually isn't quite a stalemate. It's moving gradually in favor of Russia. And in so doing, we're allowing the Ukrainians, as somebody put it the other day, to die a death of 1,000 cuts. We've got to step up our assistance in the military area. We've got to avoid risk, of course, of a widening conflict. And in the context of other discussions about the future post-peace agreement, if there ever is one, we need to be very careful about any possibility of compromising Article 5. But we must step up military activity, but we have an opportunity to step up economic activity, economic sanctions and steps in that area. We know that's going to make an impact. The head of the biggest Russian bank said so himself only a couple of weeks ago, that the Russian economy is under pressure. So we must take steps, and we must signal that we will act in response to aggression. There will be a cost. At the same time, of course, we've got to keep building our deterrence defenses in the military area. We've got to keep building resilience, and we've got to prepare for the day when Russia is no longer engaged in Ukraine and where their attention might turn more deliberately to NATO territory.
I listened to President Trump the other day say he felt that he'd been let down by Putin. It was such an understatement. It left me with this dull ache that the reality is that, this man who said he could bring peace overnight pretty much has given up on Ukraine. Is that how you heard the president? And if so, what would you caution people around him and people at the Pentagon and people at the State Department and, first of all, those around the Oval Office?
Well, the US is obviously the key NATO ally, and Mr. Trump is in charge there. And what is very clear from Mr. Trump's words and his actions is that he doesn't like war. He certainly doesn't want to see NATO involved in a war with Russia. And funnily enough, I believe probably Mr. Putin feels the same way. What Mr. Putin wants to do, of course, is divide us so that he doesn't face war with the whole of NATO. But Mr. Trump has tried very hard to reach out to Mr. Putin to, with his peaceful overtures. People have criticized that, but he's genuinely had a go. And I think it was Churchill who said, jaw is better than war. And there are things that we should be talking about in terms of, at least if not warming our relationship, then making things safer. For example, these air incursions are very, very dangerous. And there's just a line, which is a border, a national border. And of course, Russia presumably by denying they infringed Estonian airspace, are implying that that border isn't sovereign, isn't absolute. Well, in the Cold War days, we had an air defense interdiction zone, an ADIZ, and you didn't fly into that zone without calling up a radar station which contacted the air defenses of the other side. So everybody understood which aircraft were doing what, and if not why, at least they could be convinced that they wouldn't have hostile intent. We don't have that now. And in Mr. Trump's discussions with Mr. Putin, I believe he's got to be, from our point of view, we would like him to be very firm, of course, over Ukraine and over his hostile actions. But there might just be an opportunity to suggest military-to-military links to sort out some of these safety measures. Now, I don't think the atmosphere is right now because things are so bad in the relationship, and Mr. Putin is seeking to exploit potential for division. So the ambiguity of certain situations works in his favor. But certainly in the future, we must start building safety measures. And of course, we must get back to arms control talks. As I say, it's very premature perhaps to talk about that now, but we must be thinking ahead. And in the meantime, we must be absolutely resolute and firm and unified in deterrence. We must deter Mr. Putin from stepping up the ante on these measures. And I think the most effective way of doing that is to make it quite clear that it will cause consequences for him. It will impose a cost on him, which really hurts him, particularly in the context of his war aims in Ukraine.
Sir Adrian, you've given us a lot of constructive suggestions there, but just finally, are you suggesting in the end that if President Putin keeps pushing the boundaries, pushing the limits, infringing our airspace as NATO countries, that not actually taking robust military action is more dangerous than doing so?
Well, that's a fine judgment, and it's a judgment that will come out of the Article 4 deliberations. But at some stage or another, there will be a red line. And the aim is to stop Putin getting to that red line by putting him off now. That's the ultimate way of ensuring that the peace is maintained. But if he keeps pushing, and if he keeps exploring the envelope, we must respond. And at some stage or another, air infringements can and should be punished militarily. But as I say, we need to go into this very carefully. We need to ensure the unity of NATO as we do what we do. But without doubt, there must be a cost to this to Mr. Putin, and he must be discouraged from taking further aggressive steps along this road that he's embarked on, because it's very dangerous for everybody. You know, the last thing we want to see is a military engagement between NATO and the Russians. But, you know, we shouldn't shrink from that in the end, because that's the point of deterrence. You know, we need to be able to back up our statements with actions. But as I say, right now, it might well be that NATO countries feel they can impose a significant cost on Russia in other ways, and that might be appropriate. But the shoot down, of course, is always an option.
Sir Adrian, thank you very much for joining us this morning on Times Radio and sharing your thoughts. That's Adrian Bradshaw, the former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander at NATO.